In 1650, the most powerful men on the West African coast were not Europeans. They were African kings, and they were getting rich. Not from harvests, not from conquest alone, from people, their own people. This is the story that African history textbooks skip, the story that makes everyone uncomfortable on every side, the story that changes everything you thought you knew about the transatlantic slave trade. The kingdom of Dahomey sat on the west coast of Africa, in what is today the country of Benin. It was sophisticated, organized, militarily advanced. The king commanded one of the most feared armies in the region, including an elite unit of female warriors the world would later call the Dahomey Amazons. The kingdom had roads, ports, a functioning tax system. By every measure, it was a civilization, and its economy ran on selling human beings. Here is what the history books call the slave trade. European ships arrived. Europeans captured Africans. Europeans shipped them across the Atlantic. Here is what the history books leave out. The Europeans almost never went inland. They waited on the coast, because they did not have to go anywhere. The African kings brought the captives to them. The Dahomey king did not stumble into this trade. He built it. He expanded his military specifically to raid neighboring kingdoms. The Yoruba, the Igbo, the Mahi, the Bariba, villages that had nothing to do with Dahomey's politics. Families who woke up on an ordinary morning with no idea what was coming. Soldiers arrived. Houses burned. Children screamed. And by nightfall, hundreds of people were bound in rope, marching toward the coast. Not for justice, not for war, for profit. The trading post at Ouida, on the Dahomey coast, became one of the busiest slave ports in the entire Atlantic world. Between 1640 and 1870, historians estimate that more than 1 million human beings passed through that single port. 1 million, sold by African brokers to European merchants, in exchange for iron bars, firearms, rum, cloth. The king of Dahomey received a fee for every single captive that left his shores. He negotiated contracts. He set prices. He complained when European traders tried to bypass him and deal directly with other sellers. He had a monopoly, and he protected it. King Agaja expanded Dahomey's territory in the 1720s. Historians once believed he did it to stop the slave trade. The records say something different. After his expansion, the number of captives sold through Ouida increased. Dramatically, Agaja had not disrupted the trade. He had consolidated it. He cut out the middlemen and dealt directly with the Europeans himself. And Dahomey was not alone. The kingdom of Ashanti in present-day Ghana built much of its wealth on the same system. The kingdom of Oyo, one of the largest empires in West African history, sold tens of thousands of Yoruba captives to European traders. The Aro Confederacy in the Niger Delta operated an elaborate network of slave-taking and brokerage across the entire region. These were not desperate, powerless kingdoms coerced into participation. These were sophisticated states with armies, bureaucracies, and long-term trade relationships. They knew exactly what they were doing. Now here is where it gets even more complicated. The Europeans did not introduce slavery to West Africa. Slavery already existed. For centuries before any European ship arrived, African kingdoms enslaved war captives, debtors, criminals, and people on the margins of society. But there was a difference. Slavery within African societies, as brutal as it was, had limits. Enslaved people could earn freedom. Their children could be born free. They could hold positions of trust. The transatlantic slave trade had no such limits. Once you stepped onto that ship, you were gone. Your children were born enslaved. And their children, and their children. The African kings who sold people to European traders were not simply continuing an old practice. They were feeding a machine designed for permanent, hereditary, industrial-scale dehumanization. And they knew the ships were not coming back. By the 19th century, Britain had officially abolished the slave trade. Royal Navy ships patrolled the West African coast to intercept slave ships. The Dahomey king protested. He sent letters to the British government. He argued that the slave trade was his kingdom's primary source of revenue, that abolition would destroy his economy. He asked for compensation, not for the victims, for himself. And yet, the story does not end with condemnation, because the same kings who sold people also fought European colonialism when it came for them. When France invaded Dahomey in 1890, the kingdom resisted with everything it had. The same military built on slave raids now fought against French imperial forces. They lost, and Dahomey became a French colony. The very Europeans the kings had partnered with for 2 centuries turned around and colonized them. The guns they had traded human beings to acquire were eventually turned on their descendants. This is the part that no single narrative wants to hold. Not the European narrative, which wants slavery to be an entirely African problem. Not the African nationalist narrative, which wants slavery to be an entirely European crime. The truth is more painful than both. African kings made choices. Real choices. Calculated choices. Choices made in full knowledge of their consequences. And European powers made choices. And the people who paid for both sets of choices were the millions who had no choice at all. Today, the door of no return stands on the beach at Ouida. It is a monument erected to remember the enslaved. Tourists walk through it. Diaspora visitors weep at it. School children from across West Africa come to stand before it. A few kilometers away, the Royal Palace of Dahomey is also a museum. Both exist in the same country. The descendants of the sold and the descendants of those who sold live in the same nation. No official reckoning has ever been made between them. No formal apology. No acknowledgement in the school curriculum of what the Dahomey kings specifically did, not to outsiders, but to people who spoke the same languages, prayed to the same gods, and lived within a day's walk. The wound is still open. In Nigeria, in Ghana, in Benin, in Senegal, and on the other side of the Atlantic, in the United States, in Brazil, in the Caribbean, the descendants of those who were sold still carry the weight of what was done to their ancestors. Not by faceless history, by specific decisions, made by specific men, in specific places, for specific prices. History is not comfortable. It was never meant to be. The transatlantic slave trade was not a story with one villain. It was a machinery of greed, and it required willing hands on both sides of the ocean to function. Acknowledging that does not excuse the Europeans. It does not reduce the horror of the Middle Passage. It does not diminish what colonialism did to Africa for the next 2 centuries. It simply means the full truth has to be told. All of it. Because the people who suffered deserved more than a half-told story. They deserve the complete one. If this changed how you see this history, drop the word door in the comments. And tell me, which country are you watching this from? Because this story looks very different depending on where you are standing. And I want to know where you stand. One more question before you leave. Which slave trade should I cover next? The Arab slave trade, which took more than 17 million Africans over 1,400 years and is almost never discussed. The Indian Ocean trade, which connected East Africa to the Middle East and South Asia for centuries before Europe arrived. Or the Barbary slave trade, where North African pirates enslaved over 1 million white Europeans and no one ever made a film about it. Comment the one you want, because the history they never taught you is just getting started.